Hi, Victoria. Thank you for joining us here. Let's jump straight into the state of the states. So you've lived in at least a couple of countries around the world, and what is your overall feeling about how people in most countries, or at least the countries that you lived in, how they feel about the way that their state operates, like the bureaucratic machinery, the decision making, and all of that?
Yeah, hi Pete, I'm happy to be here. So I have lived mostly in Europe and Asia, and Southeast Asia to be precise. And the feeling that I get is the more established democracies are, and probably we need to exclude Switzerland in that realm, and the longer they have their institutions, the more people are removing themselves from active participation. So right now I live in Italy, and for several reasons, and it's not such an old republic, but still people just like they stopped trying to participate and change. You have low show up at votes, like Italy, sometimes even less than 50%. And so it really comes to the question of, is such a vote still valid? Like, what do you need to have a quorum? And I really wonder why it is. Is it that some things become maybe too comfortable, or is it that bureaucracy in other states has become too hard? On the other hand, we have Singapore, and Singapore is quite a young state. In '65, it was founded, and there you have. It's definitely more of an autocratic democracy. Yeah, democracy. It's definitely. But because of the way how their voting system works, it's basically impossible that the Singaporean Communist Party will ever lose the majority. And that gave the city-state, however, a lot of stability and the option to bring Singapore from a third world country in '65, where at Orchard Road it was a pineapple plantage, to a first world country. And in 40 years, 91% of Singaporeans owned a house because of their communal housing board, so the HDB, Housing Development Board, that's how it's called. Yeah. And I don't have a real answer, like what's the state of state, but I wonder whether it has to do how long, like how old the state is, or also how corrupt and functioning our institutions. And that leading also to the question, since we have digitalization is happening, the internet came about, I think there are also several areas of powers that the state has, or portfolios the state is currently regulating and trying to design and create spaces for people that should not be regulated on state, so nation state level, for to speak.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I didn't know that Singapore is even a democracy on paper, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, well, they have voting, but the way it works is, so the Singaporean state is basically then put into districts, mostly around the houses. So there is the south and so on. And then similar to what you have also in Germany for some reasons, it's like depending on, I don't know exactly anymore, but basically even if like one politician in the district has one vote war, the district goes entirely to that party. And that's how the Singaporean government and the Communist Party is ensuring power. I'm not prepared on the number of seats, but what I remember, I lived there for 2 years from 2011 to 2013. And back then it was a huge success because I think out of 86 seats or more even, the opposition for the very first time managed to get 7 out of them. So that's a little bit, but and there is a vote. It's just that it's really hard because of the way how they have designed it in the way, to have any other voice than the Communist Party.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a different Communist Party in that, like, they don't have any kind of planned economy. It's like they have the market, and they are very successful because they made this like a trading hub.
So Singapore, from the very beginning, understood Lee Kuan Yew and the fellow, so to speak, fathers of Singapore. They understood to design that Singapore as an island, because it's restricted and it doesn't have any resource in terms of soil or power. They understood that they have free resources they can use. One is their strategic location, so the harbor, allowing businesses to come in. 2, becoming a financial hub. In Singapore, when I lived there, and again, this is, I'm pretty sure today it's even more, there were 186 banks having an office in Singapore. So it's like a real financial hub. In order to become that financial hub, they also were trying to change a lot of Chinese culture, because Singapore, ethically speaking, is almost 80% so Han Chinese. And the third is their people. So they very much put on logistic, finance, and education. And that's what they built, and that's why it's... so in these areas, they're very liberal, but it's also at the same time very planned. Like their education system, children get tested and trained to excel at the age of 5. Like there is pressure and hours putting on children. Their entire school system, or at least in university when I was there, and it might have changed, I don't know that, everything was ranked on a bell curve. So if your class was performing super well, and you say the test was, the maximum you were able to achieve is 100 points, and you were doing super well, and you got like 95, 96 points, but because everybody was like somewhere between 100 and 95 points, you failed the test.
Yeah.
That's the pressure, and that's where they put it in. And also, their economy, in the sense, is planned that they said, we want to become a first world. And they really strategically planned the way how Singaporeans can create wealth. And the best wealth creation was giving them housing, because I said it earlier, 90% of Singaporeans own their apartment. And that's a huge type of wealth. That's their social housing program. And I think probably it's not a planned economy, but it's definitely a highly engineered economy for meritocracy, and yeah, and it's relatively open, but at the same time, they are planned in the sense and also a little bit authoritarian, because they don't want to allow change. So they also say, like, in order that Singapore goes from third world to first world and stays protected against the Muslim countries surrounding them, so Malaysia and Indonesia. So the Singaporean Communist Party has to stay in power at all costs, or maybe all costs is exaggerated, but that's a little bit the philosophy. So they were very aware of what's the power that they need to keep and where can they give something out so that people and the state is flourishing.
Right. And I guess this comes to the next question of like, since the Singapore government is so centralized and kind of authoritarian, how does it keep itself from becoming corrupt? Because that's been a big issue with centralized states and these sort of jammed feedback loops.
I might have been away too long to actually answer that. I think in Singapore, I don't know if it's corruption, what's happening. There might be, although speaking to Singaporeans back then when I lived there, instead of saying corrupt, they are putting everything on meritocracy. It's like you have to work hard and you have to work harder and then you earn and you get privileges. But also, I think to a certain extent, they're able to be corrupt or abusive until a certain degree, as long as it serves the higher purpose of Singapore becoming wealthier and securing the space. So Singapore still hasn't signed the Declaration of Human Rights. There are several reasons to it, but they can't, because the laws for their foreign domestic workers, so people working in the domestic houses, or the masses of low-skilled workers coming into Singapore to build like the next metro line, to put up another skyscraper for the HDB and allow Singapore to be more efficient. The working conditions of these people are, I would say, 21st century slavery.
So most of this like heavy construction work and stuff is not done by Singaporeans, but
no. Singaporeans are knowledge workers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you speak more to this? Well, it doesn't have to be focused on this specifically, but in general, this like the darker side of Singapore and its success.
I think so. Singapore's success comes also due to its size and that it's surrounded by sea. So they were able, on the square kilometers that they possess on that island, to really build up a huge experiment to build the state of a state, right? And do a model for it. It's but their resources in terms of the people is limited, right? So and also they wanted, for their own Singaporeans, they wanted wealth. So they enforced them in terms of education. They are now exporting Singaporean education into the entire region. And are becoming like a hub for knowledge and research centers. And because when in 1965 they basically become independent from Malaysia, and for the first time there was no sultan or something, because Malaysia has also a sort of federated system, but there are like each region, or you could speak in the Swiss context, it would be each canton has like one sort of royal leading that and overseeing the region. They the elite was like, okay, we as an elite know how we bring prosperity to the people and how we can do finally, like, we don't want to neglect like the Muslim and Malaysian roots that we have. There are still 10% of Singaporeans are Malay, maybe a little more even, but we want to do it differently. We want to embrace some of the more Chinese culture in terms of openness. There, it was also the time of Deng Xiaoping, where also China opened up a little. So there was, and slowly there became a little bit of a coziness to China. Today in Singapore, many of the mid-level Chinese party officials that are there to see like the next career jump, they are being brought to Singapore to being educated in topics of leadership, decision making, economics, etc. So there, I think the ties with China over, and also in the last 10 years, for the things that I've stayed connected with, the ties with China in the region become just stronger and stronger, for sure.
How do you think the Singaporeans in general feel about their state? Do they even care that like how it operates, or just like they care that it all functions well and the upward mobility?
Well, for Singaporeans, most of them still remember a time before 65, or even people that are now in their 20s and 30s, they know where they come from. Like, it's still very close in their head. Of course, there are some things, and particularly the younger generation is starting to question that very centric power of one party. But at the same time, they are quite comfortable with the way it is and the opportunities that are being created for them. So, yeah, and just think of it, it's like one tiny island, being like the absolute lighthouse in a region where, I mean, depending on how you count it, so if it's Southeast Asia, so it's definitely 1.5 billion people, like just considering that Indonesia has 600 or 800 million. Yeah. So it's incredible. Like,
Yeah.
they have really a success story.
Yeah, it really will be up to the new generation, like whether they will care or whether they will like be happy with what they got. Like on one hand, like they should be happy with what they got because most of the rest of the region is not so successful and wealthy. But on the other hand, like, yeah, you start looking into this and being like, why is this so like centralized?
I said it earlier. So Singapore pointed, for me at least, to 3 pillars, and it's their harbor, it's their strategic location, and it's their resources and people. And I think the people part, they really got that. Like, their education system is stellar, like top notch for sure. The logistics will become even more and more important with tensions growing in the region around the South China Sea. And that's also, Singapore to a certain extent managed to protect itself against any kind of invasion and so on, because the density, and it's probably not known, of military equipment and military bases from any state that are in Singapore on the tiny island is huge. So that's also why Singapore has one of the biggest, how do you call that, free ports for art and so on, you know, where people are storing valuables. Mm-hmm. Because they just know, since several countries store their weaponry there and have a military base, the likelihood of either one of them attacking each other on a tiny island is like close to zero. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's also a little bit of how they built the protection and arguably giving an indication of where Singapore could even head from here. Like, I think it could even become more important, more of a safe haven for people who can afford to go there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to us crypto people who are kind of anarchists, it matters a lot that things are decentralized, but like to people in general, like as long as things work, it doesn't really doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, I think, and that's what keeps interesting me so much. Like, as much as I'm a big fan of services that are created for me where I get a utility from, I also am very aware of like this mindset of just becoming a consumer and not thinking anymore. So I just wanna, and everything around us not in Web3, but everything around us is made to become more efficient, more that we don't care anymore about what it is, so that we only are enjoying the utility from those services and products without thinking, okay, what happens in the background? Because it's also very simple, like it's how our brain works. Talking to people, there was like a really interesting experiment from a neurologist, or several neurologists. They were asking people, draw me a bicycle on a sheet of paper. And they weren't able to draw it because they were like, is it two wheels and so on? And then they were asking like, can you tell me how the toilet works?
Yeah,
and we're like,
all the guidance.
like I probably, yes, there's a water and there's another water tank behind there, but you know, we're using it every day and are enjoying this amenities and services, and we fell into the trap of consumerism and are not asking ourselves anymore about how did we come up with that solution that is creating that incredible utility for us on a daily basis. We're just there, okay, good, I'm done. So how can we train the muscle of wanting to know how things work?
What do you think is the answer?
I don't know. I'd hope that pop-up city is an experiment where people come together that are passionate about this topic, and we will just manage to run experiment, and with each experiment receive some learnings and draw conclusions. Some of them definitely false or true, but get a step closer to the thing. And I think the first part is definitely talking about that and not being scared of asking questions.
Thank you for joining us here.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions and giving me the opportunity to share some of the sometimes decluttered thoughts in my head. So
Awesome. And thank you for organizing this, and looking forward to the bigger event next year.
Thank you.